Okay. Yes, Ed, thank you for pulling this course together, and thank you for also asking me to say a few words as well on one aspect of this multifaceted crisis that humanity faces. Um, I manage a geopolitical journal in Canada since 2012 called the Canadian Patriot Review. I myself am not an engineer or a water specialist, just to get a disclosure. But as a citizen of the world and as somebody who cares very deeply about the future and where we're going, um, I have been very attracted to this question of solving the water crisis. And I've worked very hard with a variety of people over the years to popularize and educate people around the different options that are available to both understand and then to solve the crisis facing our continent and also more broadly. Currently, what we see here on the slide is a picture of the dryness of the United States, the continent, Mexico, and some of Canada. The heat, temperature at ground level. So obviously we've got a multifaceted crisis, like I've said. We have droughts. They say that currently about 40% of California is in a bad drought, 70% is in a regular form of drought. We have desertification, which has been increasing incrementally across the especially Southwest United States, where current estimates from the United Nations warn that 40% of the U.S. Surface area is at risk, or the Southwest is at risk of desertification. 30% is arid or extremely arid. And we have other issues too. We have all seen images throughout the summertime of fires throughout California and beyond, all the way up to Vancouver. Throughout the summertime, you couldn't go outside for more than an hour. Everything was yellow because the saturation of just the effects of the fires were that bad throughout the summertime. This has been devastating on the food production. I mean, we already have seen a complete collapse for a variety of reasons of farming income from 2012, where it was $123 billion of farm income, has fallen down to $67 billion in 2019, which was even before COVID. Farm bankruptcies across the United States have spiked to a 12-year high, like I said, and this is in spite of subsidies being offered to keep things alive. And food is being dumped because of the supply chains over the last 8-9 months in COVID, restaurants shutting down, have caused a mass disruption. So farmers, in spite of the fact that there's mass starvation in the world, thousands of people die every day of food scarcity and food and starvation. In spite of that fact, they're dumping thousands of tons of vegetables, dumping milk and other products because of the supply chain breakdown. So there's big problems on a variety of levels. So I want to go through one aspect of it. The question here, and also the UN has just warned that we're facing the worst food crisis in over 50 years, and that's a conservative estimate. So what are the solutions? Obviously, there's underwater aquifers. What I have here is a picture of the Ogallala Aquifer, in which supplies this basin for the Great Plains. It's a huge zone of agricultural productivity, but as you see from the bottom image, there's been a 9 feet decline just in the last several years, between 2011 and 2015. Overall, in the last 17 years, this is only till 2017, it's declined 19 feet. So there's a huge depletion of aquifers. This is just the biggest one. So that's an option which is drying down. We have other options like obviously there's flood controls and there's different reservoirs that are available, but a lot of the reservoirs are also mismanaged. They've been neglected for a long time. What we're looking at there is an example of Folsom Lake is one major reservoir in the Southwest, which on the right hand is a picture of it in 2015. It's since replenished a little bit, but these are massive problems. We also have the Shasta Lake Reservoir at 42% of its capacity. Oroville, another major reservoir, is at 36%. There's not really a lot of creative solutions. So when people introduce, when you hear a lot of the types of solutions that are acceptable in polite society, what you tend to have are piecemeal forms of like, let's maybe divert a little bit from this one zone into this other zone. That's still very zero sum because you're still taking from somewhere, which is there's not a lot of abundance, period, in the west coast of the United States. So by taking from somewhere to bring it somewhere where it's even more needed, you're just creating more tension, more scarcity, and these piecemeal things are very limited. You can only take this so far, and we've been doing that now for 40, 50 years. The other option, which is a little bit more cynical even, is also zero sum, and this is of the view, well, where even the former governor of California, Jerry Brown, has said, and many are saying, that the problem was we shouldn't have populated the west coast of the continent to begin with. That was the mistake, and that it's actually nature telling us now that we have to get rid of our hubris, get rid of the idea that we could build the Imperial Valley of California, which became very quickly after the New Deal, it became one of the primary vegetable growing regions of the world. That was all artificial. That was built based on man deluding himself into thinking we could affect nature, but in reality, we have to adapt to deserts and depopulate. That's another solution being presented. Sure, yeah, you could adapt to deserts, or I think you could take a non-zero sum, much healthier mentality, and this has been brought up several times in the course of today's discussion so far. Looking over on the other side of the world, where we have the Belt and Road Initiative, we have the Multipolar Alliance involving 135 nations. Russia and China are leading this alternative model of finance, of economic behavior, of value, where things are not zero sum, but rather win-win. And the systems being addressed and the investment practices are not speculative, as they are so dominant in the West under Wall Street and other things that have been contaminating our way of doing economics for a very long time. If you do investment in China, you're going to be investing in real measurable productivity, things that bear fruit and also benefit the people as well as investors. So what we have here is I just took a quick picture of the the Move Southwater North project, which is moving ahead very fast. There's 3 routes to this, and China, along with all of the rail, the high speed, and other things that they're building, there's a big problem where China has a lack, just like in North America, there's a lack of water availability in the north, but the north is also where you have the greatest population densities and the greatest industry, but the water is 8% of what's available in China. So there's a lot of water in the south where there isn't very much population, but there's a lot of flooding. There's been, over the last century, millions and millions of people who have died of floods in the southern parts of China off the Yangtze, Three Gorges Dam zones. And the other problem of famine has always struck the north. So this has been really dealt with starting in 2001 with a 3-phase project. 2 of those 3 routes are already built now, of the eastern upgrade, the eastern route, the central route, and the western route. So the eastern and central are already done. It's a $62 billion project. It's moving 44.8 billion cubic meters of water overall from the south. Through tunnels, canals, 1,000 kilometers of each route, east and central, feeding into Tianjin and Beijing, has already, like I said, been built. One was finished in 2013, the other in 2017. And then the western route should only be finished. It's still in the planning phases, which will go through the Tibetan plateaus. And that will only be finished, they say, at around 2050 or so. But this is big, and they're not looking at it piecemeal. This is a holistic approach to water, which is very different from the sorts of things that we're being fed in the West. So now, this is really a revival. What China is doing is not something foreign to the West. It's not something that we should see as alien in any way, because when we look at the way that we built up under Franklin Roosevelt, under the New Deal, under John F. Kennedy, and even under Eisenhower before that, when we were building these big, large-scale projects a long time ago that we stopped doing about 45, 50 years ago, there was a different paradigm, which we now see being revived with China and with Russia and other nations collaborating in that multipolar alliance. We're just a couple of days away from the anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination, which I think was a major breaking point that moved society into a very artificial, unnatural mode of behavior that's at the heart of a lot of our problems, if you really get down to it. So I thought that it would be very appropriate to just cite a couple of speeches from John F. Kennedy himself in 1962, when he was touring the west coast of the United States and inaugurating a lot of dams that were being built, and really advocating this very continental approach to water management and thinking very long-term about the next several generations, because this was not what we're facing now in North America as a water crisis is not something we should have been surprised by. This was already being discussed in John F. Kennedy's time and before that. So JFK, just one speech that he gave at the dedication of the Oahe Dam in South Dakota, he said, the question which confronts us is the whole question of our resource development in the Western United States in the 1960s. Surely a continent so rich in minerals, so blessed with water, and a society so replete with engineers and scientists can make and must make the best possible use for the bounty which nature and God have given us. 5 days later, he speaks at Pueblo, Colorado, at the dedication of a trans-mountain tunnel system connecting the Atlantic and Pacific watersheds for the first time, where he says, and these speeches are just beautiful, but this is a segment where he says, this is an investment in the future of this country, an investment that will repay large dividends. It is an investment in the growth of the West, in the new cities and industries which this project helps make possible. And I hope that in the 1960s, we will commit ourselves to this same kind of mutual effort and not regard those projects which aid our cities as inimical to Colorado, or those projects which help our farmers as taking it away from our cities. Because that concept of the moving ahead of a great country on a great errand is what I think can give this country its leadership in the future as it has in the past. So this is a very different sort of thing than what we've seen coming out of presidents after John F. Kennedy. But this is obviously a vision which we didn't, the baton wasn't taken up, so to speak, of this spirit and this mode of committing policy to practice after John F. Kennedy fell. This is a slightly low-res version of a map that was produced and made available in a short 15-minute motion picture by the Parsons Company in 1964. This idea had been already circulated for several years before that, called the North American Water and Power Alliance. One of the big things, just like China, we have in the north, in the first picture, there was a lot of blue in Canada, a lot of yellow and red in lifeless zones in the Western United States. Obviously, what we have is a discrepancy where there's a lot of water in the north. There's about 2,200 million acre feet per year of rainfall and about 1,300 million acre feet per year of runoff into the Atlantic, into the Pacific Ocean and into the Arctic Ocean. And this is water that is just not at all even utilized by biotic activity. There's not a lot of biosphere in the tundra region anyway, especially in Alaska, Yukon, and North BC. So there's a lot of wasted water runoff. This is a project that was circulated. John F. Kennedy was working before he died with a lot of the key people who were promoting this. It became legislation in the 1960s too that had the support of Robert F. Kennedy, as well as many others from both sides of the political aisle, to basically take about 10 to 20% of that excess water runoff to capture it from Alaska before it goes back into the oceans, into the salt water, and capture that fresh water in the form of dams. We had, in the planning stages, we had 95 dams, pumping stations, because it would have to be pumped at various points, about 9 strategic points, very high above sea level. And then using the natural flow of gravity, it would be brought down into the continent into 2 circuits that would, one, replenish the Great Lakes, basically what you see there going through Canada, and along the way create a massive amount of water for irrigation, 19 million acre feet per year of water for irrigation for the Canadian provinces. Flood controls, right now we have a lot of floods in Alberta that would be managed going from Peace River. And also the Great Lakes are completely polluted. They're also lowering. This would be replenishing them, cleaning them out, and providing potentially barge canals as well that would open up and would complement rail development and other things, since the Canadian zone is completely underdeveloped. I mean, the only population zones are really strung up in several cities along the U.S. border. There's a lot of potential, but not a lot of development. The other branch would go down as we see. I've actually circulated, I've got an image which is a little bit more up to date and I think beautiful, that was produced by the LaRouche organization some years ago. And I've been circulating this on the Canadian Patriot website for many years, of an up-to-date version, just showcasing the major projects. And like I said, it involves collection agencies in the north, and then using pumps, a lot of tunneling. When you start getting down into the United States, you need tunneling because the water will evaporate. So a lot of this would be underground, just like in China. Big circuits, and these are huge tunnels. As you get into the distribution zones, this is one example. The Rocky, a lot of the point that the Parsons Company makes in this project is that the canals, a lot of them have already been built by virtue of the topography of the continent, and the Rocky Mountain Trench being a major one would provide a 500 mile long massive reservoir of the water that would contain approximately 650 million acre feet. It would just build up over the course of several years, and every year that would then, within 5 or 6 years when it's full, you could then distribute about 100 million acre feet per year into the south, and produce a lot of power along the way. There'd be something like the pumping stations themselves take a lot of power, but the whole thing would produce about 180 gigawatts of power. About 90 gigawatts would be required for pumping stations, so that would supply its own needs, and then the excess would be used for other industrial growth activity and everything else. This is all based on the presumption that the West is able to get its head out of its butt and actually stop this unipolar consumer society fiction that's causing us to go into a collapse, and instead work with the Multipolar Alliance of China and the other nations who want industrial growth, who want big projects, and don't want to think in zero-sum games. So this is all presuming that we can actually refocus our ideas on our real self-interest. So this is one aspect of it. I'll just show 2 more pictures from the old 1964 feature that people can watch on YouTube. This is one aspect of it that goes through the Idaho, Oregon, Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona in distribution zones, and also more reservoirs that would then double food production along the way. I mean, literally, you would be doubling the farmland from 21 million acres to 44.3 million acres. It would take about, anywhere between 15 to 30 years, depending on the amount of intention and support politically is put behind this. That's about the estimated time that modern engineers have estimated that this would require to be built. You'd have about 4,500 miles of canals. You'd have 95, like I said, dams. But as I said, China is creating a precedent for this that I think is forcing people to reevaluate these sorts of things that we were told couldn't happen. This would go all the way down into North Mexico along the way, and you could be able to even, as part of the circuit, replenish the Ogallala aquifer and other aquifers along the way that have dried down. This would create massive greening forest zones. It would redefine what we mean by conservation. And just one last image, because I am Canadian, just to focus a little bit quickly on the cleaning up of the Great Lakes. This would also involve different, according to the original designs that have been updated, and I think there's certain questions that still have to be answered in details, but you'd be able to also open up the door to canals to Hudson Bay, James Bay, as we see there on the left and on the right, to the Great Lakes, to Manitoba Lake and Lake Michigan, that have all sorts of nonlinear benefits as well. There's huge, as I said, minerals, resources, and other things, which, Donald Trump, we don't know what the situation is going to be come January, but there's a huge fight in the United States, and we know that Donald Trump has not only called for the revival of U.S. manufacturing. Originally, under the U.S.-China trade agreements, there was supposed to be China is a primary purchaser of the U.S. manufacturing products, but also President Trump has endorsed the Canada to Alaska rail connection, which both falls into alignment very, very synergistically with the Bering Strait development, the Polar Silk Road, which is, again, moving in through the Arctic as we speak, that could bring North America into harmony with Russia, with Asia, and other nations wanting to build rail and really develop their continents. So I would just say, ending with one last statement by JFK before I stop. JFK, he was already sort of, I think, prescient and noticing that there was the rise of a certain cynical view of large-scale development, even in his time. It's gotten much more acute today. What I've said is almost, in the course of this discussion, what I've said, what Larry has said, what Hussein Askari has said, is considered somewhat heretical by some, including many experts, looking at these problems, because your mind is not allowed to go this way anymore. We're told the only thing we're allowed to do is adapt to scarcity, adapt to the deserts. And JFK was sort of as I said, intervening on that before it became a dominant philosophy, where he said there are 2 points on conservation that have come home to me in the last 2 days. This is at the end of his West Coast tour in 1962. One is the necessity for us to protect what we already have, what nature gave to us, and use it well, not to waste water or land, to set aside land and water, recreation, wilderness, and all the rest now so that it will be available to those who come in the future. So that is the traditional concept of conservation, and it still has a major part in the national life of the United States. But the other part of conservation is the newer part, and that is to use science and technology to achieve significant breakthroughs, as we are doing today, and in that way to conserve the resources which 10 or 20 or 30 years ago may have been wholly unknown.
Okay, Matt, well, very inspiring. Did anyone estimate the numbers of dollars necessary to use to build the thing?
Yeah, this is a, in 1964 dollars, it was about 100 billion. Today, we're probably looking at a couple of, maybe $1 trillion or so investment with inflation. However, what I always tell people is, who get scared by that number is, well, look at how much we spent bombing people in the Middle East and Iraq and in Afghanistan. What is it, 8-9 trillion? Was that more payback for you? Are you happier with that?
It's exactly what I wanted to compare, the numbers.